Hello, everybody. Welcome on Mysteries with Mr. B, Mr. Belgic. Uh, Today it's Let's Talk with Ned, Episode 2, The Axeman of New Orleans. It's a crazy case, really crazy. But first, I would like to say hi to Ned. Hello, Ned. How are you doing?
Hello, Jerome. Thank you so much for having me. Hello to everybody in the chat. Looks like we've got Mr. JSV here. We've got Evie, Charlie, and Dark Side of the Moon, and of course, Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. That's you, Jerome. Thank you once again for having me on your show.
And thank you again for accepting my invitation. So, today we are talking about an old, really old case. This case um start in May 33, 1918 till October 27, 1919. I'm right?
It's complicated.
Ah, okay. But go ahead, go ahead. Like this.
Well, I think everyone in the chat knows, but anyway, I'm Nid Dahan. I'm the host of Black Box Online Radio, and I've done two multi-part discussions on the Axeman of New Orleans. One came out in 2021, and one came out in 2022. And prior to this discussion here with Jerome, I decided to go back and listen to some of my old episodes. And you can probably only need one playlist or the other, one set of videos or the other, because one was an initial discussion, and the second one was a recreation of the series that came out in 2021. Now, Jerome's asking about the time frame. If you were to Google the Axeman of New Orleans, you would see something about how the crimes began in 1918 and they ended in 1919. But when I was first learning about that, I was just thinking, hey, wait a second, I've heard of this story. I thought that the Axeman was operating in like 1910 or 11 or 12. And you might even hear me slip up and say the 1912 New Orleans Axeman in some of my videos. But what actually happened? I want to preface this by saying that this is a very difficult mystery to solve because a lot of it relies on looking at newspaper reports. A lot of it relies on people's interpretations of these newspaper reports and storytelling. This will become very, very influential on the story of the New Orleans Axeman. Some people think that the crimes of the Axeman began in 1918, as Jerome said, but there is a theory out there that I might even pull myself into, that the crimes of the Axeman actually began in 1910 and they went into 1911. But there wasn't actually an axe used in these crimes. And we have two sets of attacks. Firstly, the crimes from 1910 and 1911 are called the cleaver attacks. The cleaver, like the large knife used by the butchers. And this first one was on a family called the Crudies. Husband and wife were in bed. Somebody breaks in and attacks them with a meat cleaver that was stolen from a butcher shop, and it was not their own personal meat cleaver. And this would be the start of a set of attacks that are just very bizarre and perplexing to the authorities because money is not taken. The victims are attacked and blindsided, but very clearly there doesn't appear to be a motive. The female is not sexually assaulted, it's not a robbery. So that's the attack on the Crudies. And then we have the attack on the Rossettis, who are sometimes written as Risettos. For example, Jerome, to provide some background on the names of the victims, as I said, this becomes difficult to unravel. There is a historian out there named Michael Newton who is more famous for following the Texarkana Moonlight murders. He has a book of that name out there. And he just couldn't find any reporting on this attack on the Rossettis that's talked about in the Axeman circles. And to the credit of Miriam C. Davis, who wrote The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story, she states that the name is most likely Risetto. So you have the attack on the Rosettos, and this is the one that is done with a meat axe. And the meat axe is a larger version of the cleaver, and it's also a knife. It's not an axe, but it's referred to as a meat axe because it's heavier. And this one even just got the things going in the press where they're saying that Jack the Axeman is on the loose in New Orleans. And then we have attack on a man named Davi, and what's his first name? Is it Joseph Davi, and where he's bludgeoned in the skull. And then one that will become very important for the Axeman lore, the attack on the Skiambras. So we have the Crudies, the Rossettis, Davi, and the Skiambras. And the name of the male victim was Anthony Skiambra, Tony, and his wife would have been called Mrs. Tony. And this is in 1911, where again they're attacked by somebody with this meat cleaver, and people don't necessarily know what to make of that. Then there's just this enormous gap, and there's this halt in activities from like 1911 all the way to 1918. Why? Part of the mystery. But then we go to the attack that Jerome was talking about in 1918 on the Maggios and Joseph and Catherine Maggio, and they are attacked with an axe, and they're also the killer went for their throats. And after the attack, somebody wrote a message on a sidewalk that said, Mrs. Maggio will sit up at night just like Mrs. Tony. And Tony was misspelled, not like the way we would spell Tony in the English language, Tony. It was Toney. And again, going off of different sources, I've seen so many variants of this graffito. Number one, it says Mrs. Maggio will sit up right just like Mrs. Tony. Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony, at night just like Mrs. Tony. But that's what the important thing to remember is that Mrs. Maggio was addressed by name, and Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony. A lot of people believe that that's referring to Tony Sciambra and the final attack from the cleaver in 1911. And this is the dawn of the Axeman of New Orleans. Is there anything else you'd like to go with, Jerome, or do you want to put the
Yeah,
conversation
I
in a
would like to
particular
know
direction?
if all the victims were Italians.
Not at all, because this
No.
is another very complex issue with the case. And if you go back and you listen to my old episodes of Black Box Online Radio, were all the victims of the Axeman Italian, it becomes very difficult to try and understand, because I can tell you the list of the victims, and I can tell you what I think, and I can tell you what the other theorists think about this. So we have the attack on the Maggios, right? Joseph and Catherine Maggio. And this graffito is written on the ground that's talking about Mrs. Maggio will sit up at night just like Mrs. Tony. And the victims of the cleaver, as far as I know, were all Italian. Crudi, Rosetto, Davi, Sciambra. Those are all Italian names. Then the second attack for the New Orleans Axeman is the attack on Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe. And this is one where the victims are not Italian. Louis Bessemer was Polish. He was a Polish immigrant to the United States of America. Harriet Lowe was, I'm not exactly sure her exact ethnic background, but I don't see anything Italian in her name. I'm guessing that she was English or Irish or something, combination of all of that. But yes, they are not Italian. And this is a big story that we can talk about later on, but there's even another attack on Mrs. Schneider, and this is another conflicting piece of information. In some sources, she's listed as Mrs. Harriet Schneider, and other sources, she's listed as Mrs. Ann Schneider, and I think her name was Ann Schneider because they're probably making the conflation of Harriet Lowe, Harriet Schneider. That's how they came up with that. And also, Mrs. Crudy, who was attacked in 1910, was also named Harriet. So, but she's referred to as Mrs. Schneider universally. And there are a couple issues though with that one as well, where that might not have been the Axeman. But we have the attack on Joe Romano, who was Italian, and he is murdered. And then we have the attack on Sarah Lauman, not Italian. And then we have perhaps the most famous crime committed by the New Orleans Axeman, the attack on the Court Amelias, which saw the perpetrator going for a man, a woman, and a baby. And the female victim in that case was named Rosie Cordemelia, and the baby was named Mary Cordemelia. And Rosie would survive, and Mary would pass away. The husband would also survive. And another one that's very famous is the final attack that has been attributed to the Axeman, the attack on Mike Pepitone, which left him dead. And there is a widely held story that widely believed story that the widow of Mike Pepitone, whose name was Esther Pepitone, and she also used her maiden name, Esther Albano, who actually tried to track down somebody whom she thought was the killer. And she believed that a man named Joseph Mumfree was responsible for the murder of her husband. And she tracked him down to Los Angeles, California, and she murdered him. And as a retaliation and revenge killing. Now, a lot of these things are based on storytelling. A lot of these things are not confirmed. But Jerome asked a very good question. And he asked, are all the victims Italian? And I'm going to be very honest with you guys. I don't think the crimes that were not targeting Italian victims were the Axeman. I mean, I think the Axeman was specifically targeting Italians. Jerome, do you want to hear why?
Tell me.
Well, it goes back to reading Miriam C. Davis's book. There have been a lot of things that have been written about the Axeman, but one thing that Miriam C. Davis likes to share is that her book, The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story, is really the only book that has done a full-length, book-long presentation on the Axeman. And she said something that really persuaded me about the attack on Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe, and that is that there is no evidence of an intruder in that one. In the other cases, how does this Axeman operate? He cuts off a wooden panel, usually on the door. Some cases he may have gone through the window, but he cuts off the panel on the door. He enters, and he attacks people with either the cleaver or the axe. Then we see something very different with the attack on Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe. No panel is cut off. There is no evidence of a break-in. There's no evidence of an intruder. Harriet Lowe survives the attack for a little bit, and she blames Louis Bessemer for attacking her. She says he's the one who attacked me. And then they just get into this type of quarrel, and ultimately she would accuse Louis Bessemer of being a German spy. And they go through the belongings of Louis Bessemer, which I can only understand to be a trunk. And then they find these letters, and they find these things that are written in multiple languages: German, Russian, and Yiddish, maybe Polish too, because Louis Bessemer was Polish, but German, Russian, and Yiddish is what has been written. And she's trying to say that he was a German spy, and then all the focus comes on him. This is one of the most famous crimes attributed to the Axeman, but I'm not even convinced that there was an Axeman in this incident, because what Miriam C. Davis wrote in her book was, if there's no evidence of an intruder, then there probably wasn't an intruder. It was probably somebody from in the house. And what could have happened with this is that Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe got into some altercation. They're romantic lovers, and it turned violent. Terrible, terrible, but it turned violent, and that's the ultimate issue. But with Louis Bessemer, I don't believe he was a German spy. I mean, as I said, he was an immigrant from Poland. And I mean, Jerome, you're from Europe. Do you think it's weird for a European to have letters or pieces of paper that are written in multiple languages?
No, not especially. No.
I mean, I don't either. I don't know if Louis Bessemer was fluent in German, Russian, or Yiddish, but he had them in his possession. And like, I mean, he's from Eastern Europe, so
Yeah.
that doesn't strike me as anything out of the ordinary. But it probably did in 1918, because we're dealing with the either early war, post-war era. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
the war is still going on. That would be going till November of 1918, and the United States is against Germany in the First World War. So there's some anti-German sentiment that is going on at that point. But I don't think that that was the Axeman. Now, the attack on Mrs. Schneider, Mrs. Ann Schneider, this is one where I also don't think it was the Axeman, because number one, she's not Italian. Number two, this is one where she was bludgeoned in the head with a lamp. It appears that there was some type of home intruder who struck her in the head with a lamp. And then there's also something about how one of her dresses was taken from a cabinet or the closet, and that was found under a porch nearby, which I guess somebody was trying to clean up some blood, perhaps. I don't think that was the Axeman either. I think that was a home invader who saw her wake up, so he bludgeoned her. What it appears with the New Orleans Axeman is that he's going after Italians who specifically work in the grocery business. Why? We don't know. It's part of the mystery. But we even see this with the attacks from the Cleaver in the early part of that decade in 1910 and 1911. Somebody is breaking into people's homes, targeting Italian victims who work with either grocery stores or something grocery related. Now, interestingly, with Joe Romano, one of the victims that I mentioned, he was not in the grocery store business. He was a barber. He's frequently cited this. Like, if you would just watch YouTube videos, you'll see stuff about Joe Romano working in the grocery store business. And if I recall correctly, he was a barber, but his family members worked in the grocery store business, so someone could make the easy mistake and misapprehension. But that's my honest answer. I don't think. Well, I mean, Jerome, I think that the Axeman only targeted Italians, but some of the crimes that have been attributed to him were not victims who were Italian, but I don't think he did it.
Okay, okay. And do you know what I think? I, it remembers me the movie The Godfather, the part
Yes,
two, when people ask protection to the mafia for their own business, and if they don't want to pay, they have some problem. And it makes me think that it's maybe mafia related, or but maybe we will see that later. And another observation, it's the fact that the Axeman is not using his own tool, he's using stuff he find when he made his attack.
absolutely. Even with the Cleaver attacks in 1910 and
Yeah,
11, that's something that, like, remember from the very first interview I heard with Miriam C. Davis when she appeared on the Most Notorious podcast, that the perpetrator was stealing the meat cleaver from butcher shops, and one of them's like even 2 blocks away. And it's very bizarre, but at the same
yeah,
time, axe murders were very normal in the early 20th century and the 19th century too, for the following reason. The axe was a weapon that would have been easily available because many people had wood burning stoves,
yeah.
so they had an axe on the property. It was something that would be easy to find, that at other times could actually be left out in the open, and somebody is just grabbing that, cutting off a wooden panel on the doors, entering the houses, and attacking the people. Now, Jerome, you could be completely right about this thing involving some type of bribery or some type of protection scheme that's going on. And the term black hand is used for like a mafia
Mm,
practice with the New Orleans
yeah,
Axeman. To provide a little bit of background for the audience, after the U.S. Civil War, which went from 1861 to 1865, there was an influx of Italian immigrants to New Orleans. And I would cite the channel Dead Louisiana. I just watched very good presentation on this, and they were talking about how there's even part of New Orleans that was called Little Palermo, named after the city in Italy, because everybody thinks about the French Quarter with New Orleans, but at this time there's an influx of Italian immigrants to the point where New Orleans at one time had more Italian immigrants coming in than New York City. So there's a very big Italian community. Now, is something like a mafia practice going on? It's a defendable theory. Some of the other theories would be that as to why would somebody attack only people who are Italian and only people who are in the grocery store business. Personal vendetta. Maybe someone was working in this occupation and he was put out of business. Maybe he felt cheated by an Italian person and for some type of business deal that went wrong, or competition that ended this guy's business. We simply don't know. And I think some of those are also defendable.
I have again one question, and after
Yeah.
we will go in the chat. Do we have access to the files,
I
the
don't
police
believe we have all
report?
of them.
Or no, you don't.
And we definitely have a lot of reporting that was done by a publication called the Times Picayune, but I don't believe we
Nothing
have
from the
all the
police.
files available. Well, here's something though. Jerome wants to like ask about the files. A big portion of the story that comes to us about the New Orleans Axeman is in relation to a writer named Robert Talon. And 1952, in the 1950s, Robert Talon wrote a book called Ready to Hang that has 7 stories of New Orleans murders. As Miriam C. Davis said, lots of books have a chapter on the Axeman or a section on the Axeman. And the most famous one would be Ready to Hang by Robert Talon. And his section on the Axeman is called The Axeman Wore Wings. And it became something that was influential because a lot of people accepted his writings as gospel. Everything that he's saying about the Axeman of New Orleans. And overall, a lot of what Robert Talon was doing was he was basing stuff off of stories that he had heard. He was, a lifelong resident of New Orleans, so he would acquire these stories growing up in New Orleans, and also it was reported that he liked to hang out in bars and taverns and talk to people, and he wasn't necessarily lying. But as we've seen, Jerome, with the Zodiac Killer mystery and the Jack the Ripper mystery, that there is this nature of journalists that have swayed the conversation in somewhat of an impractical direction because the journalists are trying to tell stories. I mean, reporters are trying to tell stories as opposed to reporting on the facts.
Yeah.
And with the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper, though, the journalists and the reporters and the writers get accused of malicious activities, specifically altering these things to get a desired result. With the Jack the Ripper case, multiple journalists like Thomas Bowling and Frederick Best get accused of fabricating the letters in the Jack the Ripper case. And with the Zodiac case, the San Francisco Chronicle gets accused of fabricating and misrepresenting all kinds of things. With the Axeman of New Orleans, I don't necessarily think that Robert Talon has been accused by anybody of maliciously altering the story. Instead, I think that he was just trying to base things on what he knew and things that he had acquired over time. And it's a blend of the facts and the fictitious elements. And one thing that I did after my multi-part discussion in 2021 was I decided to contact Miriam C. Davis, author of The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story. And I just said, what is your message for the listeners of Black Box Online Radio? And she had 2 big things. One of them is that her book is the only book that is exclusively devoted to the Axeman in an entire book-length presentation. And also, she had some comments about the prime suspect in the Axeman case. And his name was Joseph Mumfree, who was a local criminal. And if you read Robert Talon's Ready to Hang, that has the section The Axeman Wore Wings, then you're going to come away from that thinking that Joseph Mumfree was the Axeman. And Jerome, do you remember last time on this segment when we were talking about the Long Island serial killer? And we were saying that there's this belief out there with all of these unsolved mysteries that the authorities know who did it. They know which criminal committed these crimes. They just don't have the evidence
Yep.
to lock them up. That's exactly what it says in Ready to Hang's The Axeman Wore Wings. The Axeman was most likely a criminal named Joseph Mumfree. They just don't have the evidence
The
to
evidence.
convict him. That's what that says. Now, I told you last time I never liked that type of thinking. It's convenient. Oh, it sounds so convenient. You just kind of solve the mystery right there. We see this over and over again. And I don't really see a lot of other people calling BS on something like this. With the Jack the Ripper case, everybody's like, oh, well, yeah, it's Aaron Kosminski. The police thought so. They just didn't have the evidence. With the Zodiac Killer mystery, oh, yeah, it was Arthur Lee Allen. They just didn't have the evidence. I mean, with the Long Island serial killer, I brought up the example of John Bittrolf last week. Oh, yeah, it was John Bittrolf. They don't have the evidence. With the Axeman of New Orleans, it was this guy named Joseph Mumfree. They just didn't have the evidence.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
convenient to think like that, but it's often untrue.
Yeah. 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 And with the time, the Axeman is became a kind of Candyman, a kind of boogeyman.
Absolutely.
So we are going to see what's in the chat. First question. Do you
Warwick
think he
Rose.
just didn't like Italians?
I've thought about that a lot. I wanted to admit that my first instinct was kind of what Jerome said. This sounds like a mafia practice. This sounds like some type of extortion for money. And maybe these people don't want to pay and then they get attacked. And they're not ever going to say, oh, yeah, well, some guy from the mafia asked me to be part of his scheme. And I said no. So he sent a hitman to kill me. That would be
No,
something that would be almost impossible to document. But I also had to admit that I don't have the evidence to support that. That's just conjecture. What would be the alternative? He just didn't like Italians, specifically in the grocery store business.
yeah. We have Haynes, Anthony.
Hello, Haynes Anthony. How's it going?
How? Dark side.
Hello, Dark Side of the Moon.
Warwick, how are you doing, man? I give you a lot of credit. Inspired by Lizzie Borden.
Haynes Anthony, I really don't know that much about the Lizzie Borden story. However, what I think the motivation for choosing the axe is just that it was a convenient weapon. And Miriam C. Davis has
Yeah.
also talked about this when she has said that if this is the same person who committed the Cleaver attacks in 1910 and 1911, then he probably switched from the cleaver to the axe because it was easier to steal. As I said, the wood burning stoves, and it's almost all these people's properties, even if it's not. You can just steal it from the neighbors. And these types of crimes are not uncommon. We even
No.
have a crime that took place in 1879 called the Dufour murders, where a couple named Dufour were murdered in their home and pieces of silver were easily available in the house. They were murdered with an axe and nothing was stolen. And it really is something that people do see from time to time. And later on in the 20th century, we're going to see the Villisca axe murders, which is another bizarre case committed by axe. And the motive is very difficult to determine. I think the axe was done and chosen for convenience.
Yeah, like you say, at the time, everybody had an axe. So, yeah, it makes sense that it's the first weapon that you can use to kill somebody is an axe. Yeah, for sure. Lizzie, yeah, Lizzie would make a good topic. Yeah, for sure.
Certainly. And one reason I've been holding off a little bit is on my channel, Black Box Online Radio, I did a multi part discussion on the book The Cases That Haunt Us by John Douglas, talking about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and JonBenet Ramsey. There is a section in his book, The Cases That Haunt Us, that covers Lizzie Borden. But I felt like I was talking too much about John Douglas and too much about that book. So I took a step back before I kept going. And I was planning on revisiting that at some point in the future on Black Box Online Radio. Fire Pixie will have an axe to grind with you, Warwick Rhodes. Oh, Fire Pixie says yes. Watch out,
Yep.
Warwick. I'm coming for you.
I'm going to show you a map, and you are going to tell me what it is exactly, because I see there is 13, yeah, no, 16 point on this map, but like I don't know so much about this case. You are going to explain me what it is.
Let's see. Oh,
So,
wow. Can you zoom in?
yeah.
Well, I won't be able to comment too much on this exact map, but I will share a couple things, though, about these activities. And it sounds like, as we say, we have multiple attacks in 1918, 19. And it also sounds like maybe 16 is going to include some of the attacks from the Cleaver in 1910 and 1911. So, was this the same perpetrator? When I first heard Miriam C. Davis talk about this, you can go back and hear it on my old episodes of Black Box Online Radio, when I reviewed this, she said that she contacted a psychological profiler who said that almost certainly this is the same killer. This is the same perpetrator. If like you had these crimes in 1910 that are so similar to the crimes in 1918 and 1919, it's the same killer. And I was shocked. I think I was driving to work and I downloaded the show on YouTube Premium and I'm listening to it as I was driving and I'm just kind of like going down the road like, what? And what I openly said on BBO War was that psychological profiler needs to go back to Psychology 101. Just because we have Cleaver attacks in 1910 and Axe attacks in 1918, that doesn't mean it's the same person.
No.
Couldn't there be another explanation? However, after I read her book in its entirety, almost anyway, maybe skipped a few pages here and there, I saw the full presentation, what she's talking about, and what the psychological profiler would be talking about. Number 1, home invasions. Number 2, targeting Italians. Number 3, people who are in the grocery business. And number 4, attacking them without trying to steal anything. Yeah, that does sound like it is the same perpetrator. And this is one of the times on Black Box Online Radio and in the true crime world that I had a very big reversal about something where I was just like, I actually think that this could be the same killer who's just operating. And then there's this enormous time gap of about 7 years, and then they start operating again. What could have happened? Number 1, the Axeman was sent to jail for something else. Number 2, he was in the military, even World War I, but maybe he's in the military and he's stationed somewhere prior to World War I before he comes back with post-traumatic stress disorder. Number 3, he was working with the mafia and they relocated him or they made him do something else. And just that it wasn't required of him. So I also want to point out, though, that when I was conversing with Miriam C. Davis, and I also wanted to ask her something, and that is that, do you think that there really was an Axeman? How much of these stories are made up? What do you think about that? And this is another point where I had to read her book before I could truly digest it. And what she said was that I think there was an Axeman. I think there was a real serial killer called the New Orleans Axeman. But I think some of the crimes that have been attributed to him were things that he didn't do. And there are also other crimes that have not been attributed to him, which he did do. As a case in point, the Cleaver attacks in 1910, 1911, the attacks on Crudi, Davi, Riseto, and Sciambra, those. And then we would have the crimes that occurred in 1918 and 1919, which I've already told you that I don't think the Axeman did. The attack on Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe, the attack on Mrs. Schneider, and the attack on Sarah Lalman. So this is also something where I normally don't just read one book and have a complete reversal on my theories in a true crime case. But in this case, I did. And it's not simply that it was a convincing presentation. It's that it's evidence-based. I mean, it's just looking at the fact that all the other crimes are Italians who are working in the grocery business. And this claim that there's no evidence of an intruder in the Louis Bessemer Harriet Lowe case. And Mrs. Schneider is attacked and beaten with a lamp and not an axe. There you go there. So that just seems like a different perpetrator to me. And I mean, I do agree with that. There was an Axeman, but not all the crimes that have been attributed to him actually were the Axeman.
Okay. Oh, Fire Pixie. Oh, thank you. Thank you to become a member.
Very nice of you, Fire Pixie.
Thank you very much. And on my understanding, the Axeman was like the Zodiac, was sending letter to the press or the police.
Yes, there is one letter that has been attributed to the Axeman, although we have to be clear. There are at least 2 pieces of writing attributed to the Axeman because we have the graffito that was written after the Maggio murders. Mrs. Maggio will sit up at night just like Mrs. Tony. That often gets overlooked that there are at least 2 communications that could possibly be written by the killer. Now, I wanted to ask you, Jerome, do you have the text of the Axeman's letter?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, and do you want to put that on the screen for the audience?
Yeah, the L March 13, this one, the
That should
estimate
be.
mortal.
Yes, that's it. There's really only one letter that's attributed to the Axeman, which again is so different than Jack the Ripper or the Zodiac, because at the very least, three letters are widely discussed in the Ripper case. All right, can you zoom in just a little bit more?
Yes,
'Cause I think we should read this off for the audience.
yes,
And
absolutely.
because Jerome and I both closely follow the Zodiac killer mystery. We do the panel discussion show here on Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. I also do my segment about the Zodiac Killer every Monday, Zodiac Monday on Black Box Online Radio. And I know that a lot of you guys in the chat follow the Zodiac Killer mystery. So just do you hear anything Zodiac related or Jack the Ripper related in this letter? Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed immortal. They have never caught me, and they have never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way that they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, or maybe Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better. Okay, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me as they have in the past. They are wise and they know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, the you Orleanians think of me as a horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night, and at will, I could slay thousands of your best civilians or citizens, for I am in close relationship with the angel of death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, sorry, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I'm going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that will be every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing. I have just mentioned, if everyone has a jazz band going, well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out that specific Tuesday night, if there will be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, it is about time I leave your earthly home. I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou will publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, and will be, the worst spirit that has ever existed, either in fact of realm or fantasy, the Axeman.
Wow. Yeah, it's something. It's sounds like the confession letter and the letter of the Zodiac.
Absolutely. Like, I don't know if the Zodiac Killer read this. I don't know if he was familiar with the Axeman case. And Peter says, it sounds a little like the Zodiac. Right. Number one, he says that he's going to go to some other spiritual realm and he's going to use people to keep him company. The Zodiac Killer of the 1960s said that he wanted
Slaves.
slaves in paradise that will work for him. When I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and those who I have killed will be my slaves. And I now have enough slaves to work for me, whereas everyone has no one. Okay, right? Also, about how he's giving these taunts, about how the police are trying to catch me, but they can't because he is too clever. lots of things are very reminiscent of the Zodiac. But this is 1919. Oh,
Yeah,
let's see, 50 years, right? Yeah, 50
yeah,
years
yeah,
before the Axeman operated. I also think that the Axeman, whoever wrote this letter, was inspired by Jack the Ripper's From Hell letter.
yeah,
Esteemed mortal, I am from hell is more or less what he is
yeah.
saying. Jack the
From
Ripper
hell.
had a letter attributed to him from hell, the From Hell letter. He's more or less saying that he's a spirit out of hell. The Axeman is saying the same thing. So as we
Yeah,
see, the Axeman is just right in the middle of Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac. And this is about 30 years after Jack the Ripper began operating to the
yeah,
year. I mean, really, it's 30 years to the
yeah.
start of the Whitechapel murders, which began in the spring of 1888. The Axeman started operating in the spring of 1918. And then another 50 years to the Zodiac. So
68. Yeah,
this is just like a combination of both, and maybe the Zodiac took inspiration from both of these killers. But what about you, Jerome? Like, did you see anything reminiscent of the Zodiac in that letter?
yeah. A lot, really, a lot,
Absolutely.
a lot. And he's talking about music, and he take a long time to talking about music. I wonder if this guy was not a musician. It's possible.
I
I
think
mean,
so.
there is nothing who contradict the fact that he could be a musician. he, he say here, at will I could slay thousand of your best citizen. Make me think about the citizen card. The angel of death. Make me think of the um, Satan slave.
Oh, sure, sure. Like, and I know the Zodiac's referencing a movie, even the Exorcist letter, but
Yeah,
something about like devils and demons, but that's the Exorcist, the movie. Okay, though,
he tried
I'm
the
going to be very
police.
honest with you, Jerome. With the Axeman's letter, I do not think that this was written by the killer. And this is one point that I have been extremely strong on. Not where I've read somebody's book and I've had a reversal or anything like that. I do not believe that this letter was written by the killer. I don't think that the language in this letter is anything like what we're seeing from the Axeman crimes. We have somebody who's breaking into people's homes, chiseling out a wooden panel, sneaking in, bludgeoning them, and just leaving. They are dumb, unsophisticated crimes, but they are somewhat organized, somewhat planned, not a lot of planning, not meticulous planning. And everything that I'm seeing in this Axeman letter is a very educated person who doesn't appear to have any real destructive tendencies. I think it's what Jerome said. I think this letter was written by an out of work jazz musician who was really just trying to get a job playing jazz
Yeah,
the whole night. I don't know if he was the saxophonist or the upright bass player or something, but I think that that's what it was. I think this letter is a pure hoax and it wasn't written by the killer.
yeah. It looked like yeah, really. It looked like a kind of oaks, and yeah. In the same time, it's looked like really like the zodiac. And wow,
But like I talk about this stuff a lot, and this is the stuff where I put my neck out there a little bit when I say that I think the Zodiac was taking influence from all of these killers, like Jack the Ripper, the Axeman,
yeah,
and the Texarkana
yeah.
Moonlight Murders from 1946. When you go back and you listen to my old episodes from 2019, I did always say that the Zodiac of the 1960s might have just had similar psychological issues compared to these killers. So it's possible. And I don't want to just act like, I'm always on the fence. I think that the Zodiac was familiar with these stories. Jack the Ripper, absolutely. Phantom Killer, absolutely. New Orleans Axeman, maybe. I'm not 100% convinced. And also, as we see, we really only have these two communications that are widely attributed to the Axeman, this letter that we just read, and the graffito about Mrs. Maggio and Mrs. Tony.
And about the level of evil in his crime, um, do you see? somebody really anger uh, on his victim, or somebody who is asked to do that, or
Well, we definitely see an escalation in some activities because, as I said, the Axeman is targeting couples, men and women who are in their homes, and he is going after them when they're in a vulnerable place, about to go to sleep, or they're already asleep. Then, with the attack on the Court Amelias, the Axeman goes after a man, a woman, and a child.
yeah,
So it appears that the Axeman didn't have a problem killing children because the child's name was Mary Cordemelia, and she's the victim that passes away. Now, this is very odd in the story because there are two witnesses named Frank and Orlando Giordano who are the neighbors of the Cordemelias. And when they're questioned by the police, by they, I mean the Cordemelia family, the parents survive. Rosie Cordemelia, the mother, says that the attacker was one of the Giordanos, Frank or Orlando Giordano. And ultimately, she has this reversal where she's like, she changes her story and then just says, no, it wasn't them. My take on that is, I think that she was just overwhelmed with emotion. She didn't know what was going on. And somebody here, it's actually Warwick, who says, why do you keep saying it's a man? You don't know. No, we don't know 100%, but there are witness descriptions of this perpetrator where they just say that there is someone who appears to be a man. They can't make out facial features, but there are lots of survivors of the Axeman. This goes back to the mafia theory. This person's trying to send a message. He doesn't even care so much that he's killing them. Because if somebody were trying to break in and kill the victims, he could do so relatively easily. This appears to be somebody who is just striking them,
yeah,
and then he's making a getaway. Rather stealthily, actually. Just seems like someone who is definitely not very worried about what he's doing, what we would say low in neuroticism. But there are witness descriptions that are of a male perpetrator. I also believe that the perpetrator was male, even if I don't know that 100%.
yeah. And in the same time, he could be a musician, and in the same time, in the mafia, there isn't.
Well, why not? Yes, I mean that could be, and then he did write this. Could be some very well educated person who was blackmailed by the mafia. There really is not a lot of information about the New Orleans Axeman, so it drives us to this point. And hello, Captain Jenks, how's it going?
Hello.
Haynes Anthony says, was jazz considered to be race music? Now, it's my understanding that when jazz was first created in the 1800s, it is actually some of the most famous jazz musicians were white, such as the Dixieland Jazz Band was a Caucasian group of jazz musicians. And I would expect that there would be some type of race issue and all that, but I'm not 100% sure about that, Haynes Anthony, that jazz was considered race music. What I did hear and read was that when the Axeman put out this threat, or the hoaxer, in my opinion, put out this threat about if you don't jazz it up, you're going to get the axe, that people actually listened. And all through the city, they had the jazz bands playing and the parties. And if this was an out of work jazz musician who just wanted to get employment for the night, so like have a night long gig, that
Yeah,
succeeded. But that would be, if it's all throughout the city, that means you're going to be dealing with people from all kinds of ethnic backgrounds. Now, somebody had a very good question at the beginning talking about, well, like, what were the kind of impacts of the Axeman? And again, citing Dead Louisiana for this, they're just saying that Italians in Louisiana knew that they were the primary targets. So they would take turns sleeping. Like they would sleep in shifts. One person's awake, one person would hold the gun, and they would be lookouts. People really believed that this threat was real. And it was, though, because that's really all you had to go on. Italians working in the grocery business. But if this stuff was all reported on as being one killer, then people like Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe, they weren't Italian, or Ann Schneider or Sarah Lauman, they weren't Italian. So then the whole city should probably have been on alert. Warwick says Franz Josef, really. I don't know a whole lot about him. Do you, Jerome? I know that
Nope.
there's a Franz Joseph land that's part of Russia in the far, far north, and that's really the only thing that comes to mind. And Warwick, if you have something else about Franz Joseph, you can put there in put that in the chat. Yeah, Jerome, can you bring that one back from Fire Pixie? What I just said, is he collecting slaves too? It sounds like it, right? In that letter, he's pretty much saying that he wants to send people back down to hell or send them to hell and that he will be with them at a certain point. It sounds like he's collecting
Yeah.
slaves. I mean, now, did the Zodiac take inspiration from that? I don't know, but like there's definitely elements of Zodiac's thinking in the X-Men letter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really a read case.
Yeah, Fire Pixie's right on. There were survivors, and they said it was a man. Once or twice, they said it was a couple of men. And do you remember the exact incidents where they said it was a couple of men, Fire Pixie? And most of what I heard is just that there was a single perpetrator, and they just see like this figure that's in the house. Because bear in mind, this is at night, and the lights are out, and they're just awake and being struck by either the axe or the cleaver, and they aren't really prepared for this, and that's how this killer got away with it.
I had a message from the beginning from Russ.
Ah, yes, Ross Geraci of Planet X Filmworks. This case is crazy. I take crimes against Sicilians personally. Oh, yes, of course you would, Ross, and I don't blame you. But it does appear that somebody had some type of racist agenda. Now, or there's a specific reason why the Italians were targeted, and many times we're going to see that these multiple killers theories are going to start to fall apart a little bit. And it's almost as if just this motive is so unique that I ended up agreeing with that psychological profiler whom I unfairly insulted and put down because yes, this does seem like it's the same perpetrator. Haynes Anthony says Franz Josef was Emperor of Austria. Oh, thank you for that. They named Franz Josef Land in Russia after him. Cool. Emperor of Austria. Well, like I just really don't think the home invasion style Axeman killer would be the type of person to make references like that. I don't know what you
Yeah,
thought, Jerome.
I
That
don't think
letter
so.
from the Axeman sounds very educated. We're talking either university level or someone who's read every book in the library.
Yeah, yeah, because it's really well writing and
Fire Pixie says, I cannot remember her name. The husband died and she survived, and I believe she said she saw the silhouette of two men, but then again, she was injured, so I don't know how much weight you can put into that. Yeah, if somebody's injured, they could easily mistake that for double vision. Like, they could have the double vision. I believe later on she killed a man that was one of the suspects, but it happened in Los Angeles. That would be the attack on Mike Pepitone, and as stated, his widow was named Esther, and she's often referred to by her other name, Esther Albano. And the murder that took place in Los Angeles was that of Joseph Mumfree. And we're going to come back to him finally. Remember everything I said so far about how there's just this convenient type of thinking about how they have the prime suspect. They just don't have the evidence to convict. Well, this is Miriam C. Davis's big discovery, and that is that Joseph Mumfree could not have been the Axeman. And that is because in her research, she's uncovered that he was incarcerated in Angola prison in Louisiana at the time of the crimes. So
okay.
it
Yeah.
wasn't him. But you got to understand this. And when you read Ready to Hang by Robert Talon, it sounds so convincing that this guy was the Axeman. Like the final three paragraphs are all just about how, yeah, it probably was Joseph Mumfree, but we will never know. It's worded in a very convincing way. Yet, according to her research, and she's said this publicly, so I don't feel like I'm giving away the ending of her book, then that's the ultimate conclusion. It doesn't seem like it was him. There's also a lot of doubts on some of the details involving the story of Joseph Mumfrey, the prime suspect. You know, like where there just doesn't appear to be a lot of news coverage to support all of these things surrounding his death, that he was murdered in Los Angeles, and that this woman named Esther Albano believed that he had killed her husband. I tend to think that it's true, but I'm always open to new discoveries, because even going back to 1918, things are not as well documented as we would like them to be.
I'm wonder if it's a question because I don't know if there were ritual aspect in the crime, because in Louisiana, with all the voodoo religion, and I would like to know if they have made some observation about the crime, if there is something we can relate it to a cult or a voodoo or religion.
Okay, so firstly, Jerome is completely correct. Voodoo is big in New Orleans. Robert Talon, author of Ready to Hang, even has two other books out on this subject. One of them is a novel called The Voodoo Queen, and one of them is a book that is just about voodoo in itself. Now, Jerome, I'm going to disagree with that completely. I don't see anything ritualistic about these murders and these attacks. Even going back to the Cleaver in 1910, 1911, it's just someone is stealing a sharp or blunt object or instrument and attacking people while they sleep. I certainly don't see anything that, like a voodoo doll left behind, a signature left behind. The victims aren't posed in a particular way to make us think that it was ritualistic or ceremonial. This appears to be somebody who has a problem with Italian grocers. This appears to be a personal vendetta, in my opinion. Personal vendetta, revenge killing, or as we've already said, specific targets from the mafia because of their own extortion
Yeah.
rings. Although I completely understand that people are not going to rat on the mafia because they will be brutalized even worse, but all of these incidents, and no witness has come forward confidentially or something like that and provided this explanation. I don't know. I've had doubts about that in the past. And that leads me to believe that there could be a possibility that these are just revenge killings, and that maybe
Could be.
somebody's father was an Italian grocer, Warwick. And like somebody's father was an Italian grocer and they hated their father, something like that. So I've really tried to keep an open mind to different possibilities
Yeah.
outside of this mafioso theory, but voodoo and ceremonial practices, I'm not seeing a lot. My apology to Jerome. I posted a negative comment about his accent. I think that means accent.
Oh, excellent. Oh, there is no problem. I don't take anything wrong.
Oh, I had to
I
apologize to Jerome during the last Ripper Wednesday episode when I was talking about the painter Edgar Degas, because there are lots of French things that came up, and you have to listen to my West Virginia voice trying to talk and say all these French names. It's not easy. Not everyone's from the same part of the world. We all deal with it at some point.
Yeah, and I do what I can, and I try to do my best, and but no, my English is not perfect. That's right, that's true, and I accept it. But I try to do my best,
Well,
like
that's something
always.
important, Jerome, because as I said, I'm dealing also with all of these French names for other things. Even with the Axeman of New Orleans, we have a lot of things in the French Quarter, so to
Yeah,
speak. I don't pronounce them as well as you do. And I accepted a long time ago that, I'm an American and I grew up with only English and the foothills of West Virginia. So I just realized that I am going to pronounce things in an accented way. And I just had to accept that that's the way it is. And people tried to help me improve, pronunciation. I'm like, yeah, I get it, but it's also I'm not from there. It's going to come
no,
out with an accent no matter what.
no, sure. When you are not from the country itself, it's always different. Or there is some emoji, but I don't understand what it is.
Mr. JSV, are those French fries? Oh, French fries.
Ah, French fries. But you need
Because
to say Belgium fries because
they are from Belgium. Is that right, Jerome?
yes, yes, and I really don't know why they call that French fries, but
Nicely
I
put, Warwick.
I suppose.
So, Jerome, is there another
Yeah,
particular aspect of the case that you would like to explore?
yes. So you think this guy is a musician?
I think the author of the letter was a
Ah,
musician.
the leather. Okay.
Right. I don't think the letter was written by the killer.
Ah, okay. So no, no.
No, I
This
don't think that the Axeman was a musician. I think that he was somewhat of a hardened criminal, and he most likely would have been working a menial job. He would have been working a job like maybe some type of handheld labor, and he may have been something like a longshoreman, a dock worker, boat worker. He would be somebody who does not have a lot of skills. Definitely not that type of education. Returning to my native Tartarus, I don't even know what that is. So it's like I think that he is someone who was most likely not extremely educated. Maybe the Axeman or the Cleaver attacker had some type of schooling at a certain point. I don't even know about that. There's really not a lot of evidence to support that. Now, here's something really interesting, though. I keep coming back to this that there are these two communications. The first one is the graffito after the first Axeman crime. The first crime that's been attributed to the Axeman in 1918 is the Maggio attack. Mrs. Maggio will sit up at night just like Mrs. Tony. I also don't believe that the killer wrote that one. And this is really not me trying to just be a naysayer and look at all the clues and just say
no.
they're all dead ends. What this is an alternative possibility. How could somebody write this graffito identifying the victim by name before it was published in the papers? And full credit goes to Miriam C. Davis again. Gossip. She's the one who provided this. People are spying on the police. They're looking at what's happening. Oh my goodness, something happened at the Maggio house. And somebody remembered the story of Tony Sciambra and his wife being attacked in 1911. And they wrote that also as a prank or a hoax, or it wasn't written by the killer. I don't think that the killer wrote the graffito because I don't think that this is the type of killer that is going to leave behind these messages. I don't think that this is the type of killer that is going to leave behind any type of signature that's going to be done in the form of writing. And as we've already said, this guy isn't leaving behind, items or something like a calling card, and he's also not taking trophies to the best of my
No.
knowledge. Could be something else. Jerome turned out to be a gentleman. He replied nicely, and of course, Ned is the current star of true crime. Not exactly, Sir Sheila. As I understand, Jerome has just scored an interview with Jerry Buting, the former defense attorney for Stephen Avery, who was featured in Making a Murderer. I think Jerome is the current star of true crime, and that's going to be a very big one that we're all going to be looking forward to. As you guys know on Black Box Online Radio, because of Jerome's request, I began following the Making a Murderer story and Stephen Avery, Brendan Dassey cases. So, looking forward to that one, Jerome. Nice work.
Thank you very much. But for me, you are the star, Ned, and everybody in the chat is a star. Is a star. You are all great and all stars.
And Haynes Anthony, absolutely. You can be the star for this one.
Oh,
Tartarus is like Hades. Haynes Anthony, you've been an encyclopedia of knowledge yourself in this one. Tartarus is like Hades, like the underworld. Sure, that would make perfect sense. And, it's that's just sort of saying, like, I'm from Hades, I'm from the underworld, and I want to take people back to the underworld. Again, lots of stuff going on in the chat. And Mr. JSV says Ned had Aphrodite on. That was star worthy for sure. Oh yes, Aphrodite Jones appeared on Black Box Online Radio, and it was very nice of her to do so, and I really appreciated that. Someone who multi-published author who's had multiple TV shows, and yeah, that was great stuff. And I'm really just gonna try and keep it coming for the time being. And I I also have to recognize that Jerome, my channel isn't big or anything. Right now, it's at like 4,300 subscribers. To me, that really is small compared to some of these other true crime channels, but onward and upward, so they say.
Yeah.
Darkside says, "Oh boy, Ned started looking into that case. Looking forward to your thoughts on that case. Do you mean Making a Murderer?" Yes, I have several episodes. Like I
Yeah.
did a direct response to Jerry Buting's book Illusion of Justice, which Jerome and I will be discussing with him hopefully on Friday, right?
Yep.
And I have one on that, also one on the book Convicting Avery, and I have a three-part book discussion on Wrecking Crew by Kathleen Zellner, as well as just my
By,
responses
by
to
John
the.
Ferrac. It
Excuse
was
me.
by it was by John Ferrac.
Oh, Wrecking Crew is by John Farrock.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Kathleen Zellner is the lawyer of Stephen Avery.
Oh, okay. That's right. That's right. Yes, Buzz. Oh, that's right. Because when I did the first episode, I called him John Freak because I
Yeah,
got the letters backwards. That's right. That's right.
I
Wrecking Crew by
remember.
John
Yeah.
Farrock. But I have a three-part book discussion on that. As you see, it's been 3 years since I read that one, which again, Jerome shared with me, and he encouraged me to look into that case. And I have my responses on Making a Murderer. And yeah, lots of things you can find on Black Box Online Radio. And as always, you can also subscribe to Mysteries with Mr. Belgique and BBO War. As Ryan Burns said when he was a guest on my show, you can subscribe. It's free.
Yeah, it's true. It's completely free. Off topic. Have a dive into the Atlanta child murder.
Yes, Fire
The
Pixie says off topic, but would you guys do a deep dive into the Atlanta child murders, or is that too big? Absolutely, Fire Pixie. I would do that. I've done one episode where I've talked about the Atlanta child murders with Wayne Williams. And for starters, there's
yeah.
a Zodiac killer letter in 1981 that references the Atlanta child murders. You know what's really interesting, Fire Pixie, is that I think of the Atlanta child murders the way that I think of the New Orleans Axeman, where I think there was a serial killer. I think Wayne Williams was a serial killer slash murderer, but
Yeah,
perhaps not
yeah.
all of the crimes attributed to him were actually committed by Wayne Williams. Not all of the crimes attributed to the Axeman were committed by the Axeman, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is something we can see in the TV show Mindhunter by John Douglas and made by um, David Fincher. And it's in the season 2. They are talking about the Atlanta child murder, and yeah, it's okay.
There's only one Aphrodite, mighty Aphrodite. But
And
lots
I
of stuff from guys in the chat, so going in all types of directions here. Oh, Darkseid said, yes, I thought he was innocent for years. I now believe he is guilty. Jerome is still my pal. Darkseid, were you persuaded by the documentary series? Jerome, what's that called? Convicting a Murderer with Candace Owens? Is
yes,
that what it's called? Darkseid, were you persuaded by Candace Owens and her Daily Wire Plus show? Um, well, Darkseid, do you think that Brendan Dassey was also guilty? Do you think that he was someone who was also involved in the murder of Teresa Hallback the way that they claimed he was? Now, that one, I don't think Brendan did anything. I think
no,
he's
me neither. No,
vilified. And I
no,
really just would love to sit down with Jerry Buting and go through all of these things and get his take on the subject because I don't think he is going to be completely gung ho for innocence. I think he's going to actually have some open minded things.
yeah, and like me, you see, with Dark Side, we have a long story with the French wrecking crew and the old crew who were on the Stephen Avery case. And at the beginning, she was thinking that Stephen and Brendan was completely innocent. Oh, she said,
Sadly, Brendan was manipulated. I believe he did some of it,
and
though. Sorry,
she
as
changed her
Jerome Stan,
mind.
don't
She
be
changed
sorry.
her mind, and
Yeah.
sadly, Brendan was manipulated. No, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. I always said we all have an opinion of something, and now we can be in a disagreement, but there is no problem with that.
Mr. JSV says, guys, you have to watch Jay Embry on the Idaho 4 Koberger case. He has me convinced Koberger's innocence. I've never heard of Jay Embry. It sounds
Me
familiar, though.
neither.
Maybe I have watched that in the past. Now, Mr. JSV, I'm just waiting for this because, as we've heard, Brian Koberger has been vilified in the court of public opinion. You get on Court TV, Daily Mail, and what's that other one? Law and Crime Network. They make him look guilty as sin for the following reasons. They just go through things. Brian Koberger's DNA was found at the scene of the Idaho murders on the knife sheath. His bizarre movements, cell phone pings that are placing him in odd locations in the state of Idaho, not near his home, where it's almost like he committed the murders, drove due south, went to a supermarket, then drove westward and then northward back to his home in Washington State. And it just seems all consistent with the timelines. Turned his cell phone off for the time of the murders, turned it back on after the murders. I await for this because I approach things with an open mind. Number one, innocent until proven guilty. Number two, I mean, what if this is just the media latching onto a suspect and vilifying him? I'm I'm totally down for this, and I would definitely watch a presentation on this.
Oh yeah, it happened all the time. No, sorry, it was not this one. It was, yeah, this one.
Yes, Wayne was convicted of
Yeah.
killing two adult men and no children. Fire Pixie. With the Wayne Williams crime, that's completely correct, right? And the children in the Atlanta child murders were simply attributed to Wayne Williams, if I understand. And this happens in other cases, even in some possible Zodiac victims, such as the murder of Joan Webster from 1981. Her death was attributed to a serial killer named Leonard Paradiso, although he was never convicted for it. He was convicted for the 1979 murder of Marie Iannuzzi, and then they attributed Joan's death to him. It's a way of closing the case without actually convicting anyone. So I think that's what happened with Wayne Williams. And is there another one you wanted to go to in the chat, Jerome? Yes, Sarab Sheila says, what's your take on the Burger Chef murders? Full panel would be a great show. I don't know enough about it. I saw one program about this, I think
Never heard it.
on the Citizen Detective podcast, but I don't know enough about it to give you an informed opinion.
And to give me just a quick story, could you tell me what is all about this Burger Chef murder?
Accurately, no, I can't, but I'm going to try my best. I want to say, and Zarab Sheila, correct me if I get anything wrong, that there were four people that were murdered, and Burger Chef is the name of a restaurant. And well, there are multiple people who were murdered who were working at this Burger Chef restaurant, and there's a bunch of forensic evidence that was left behind, but it was all mishandled and so on. And it's like I watched that on the Citizen Detective podcast, I think, but that's one that I didn't absorb and digest completely.
And the Fire Pixie here.
She's talking about Brian Koberger and the
Yeah.
Idaho murders. I don't know if he's innocent or guilty, but I don't see how he could have massacred four people and not get a drop of DNA in his car or anything. Aha, Fire Pixie, how could somebody do something like that? Because Brian Koberger took the shower curtain from his bathroom and most likely put it in the car somewhere. And all the only evidence to support this is when the authorities raided his apartment, the shower curtain was missing, the trash was gone, and he there's even something about like the trash in the dumpster in his own place was full, so he asked a neighbor if he could use theirs, kind of like putting it in suspicious places. Now, you'd think that something gets left behind, right? Because some people think that he used the shower curtain either in the trunk, the back seat, the front seat, something to
No.
that effect.
If you
But
have other
overall,
question, go ahead.
yeah, I have some questions for you, actually.
Yeah.
What do you think about the New Orleans Axeman? Is there a particular theory that you're going with? Is there one that makes the most sense to you? Is there some observations that you've made about the case? Do you have any kind of profiling statements about the New Orleans Axeman?
But yeah, for now, because I'm just learning about this case, so yeah, I have a beginning of answer. I maybe I'm wrong, but let's say that I think this guy was a hitman for the mafia, and yeah, he was after the people who won't pay for their own security, like in The Godfather. Um, yeah, for me, it's something who makes sense, but in this this kind of world, something sometimes there is nothing who makes sense. So not sure.
Absolutely, sometimes there are things that don't make sense. But I really would be curious what you think about some of my observations, which aren't
Oh,
only exclusively mine.
your
Also,
observation are really really great, really, because I don't know I don't know the case like you know the case, but your observation are always great, and for this one is the same. Great observation, always.
but a lot of credit goes to Miriam C. Davis, who wrote the book The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story. And if anybody wants to follow up with this and watch something else, I have lots of episodes about the Axemen on Black Box Online Radio, but the only one that I will recommend to you is the interview I did with Miriam C. Davis. And that was an opportunity that I had to interview someone whom I've closely followed in the past. And really, her and Brian Davis, also named Davis, unrelated, from the Tate LaBianca radio program, was the other person whom I've followed most closely from my interview series last year. But here's some things, though, with the Axeman of New Orleans that Miriam C. Davis convinced me on. And it relates to the attack on Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe. And again, this is off of my recollection. And I don't even know if she agreed with this thing, but when you read Roberto Lan's Ready to Hang, it's called the Axeman Wore Wings because it's almost as if he's just kind of flying in to some crime scenes and leaving without putting any evidence behind. And when I was reading that part of his book, it was my understanding that he was referring to the attack on Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe. That they think that if it was the Axeman, he went in through the window or something like that and didn't touch anything or break anything, sort of, and he attacked them. But again, this really allowed me to have that very big reversal reading Miriam Davis's book when she's just like, there's no breaking and entering. And also, there's
I'm
a
going
point,
to read it. Yeah.
and that is that Louis Bessemer was already married. He was married to a woman who was in Cincinnati, Ohio at the time, and Harriet Lowe was, I guess you'd say, a mistress, but maybe even just a girlfriend is a better way of putting it, because sometimes she says she's his wife, sometimes she says that she's not, and she went back and forth all the time, and she had a lot of conflicting things that she was sharing about him. And ultimately, Harriet Lowe would pass away from her injuries, and that she would be just somebody who is a victim in this case, no matter what. And she was definitely attacked by somebody, and she was in the hospital for a very long time, so she's able to give lots of witness statements. And just going off of memory, I believe Louis Bessemer actually went on trial for this and was found not guilty. But It's like it's a very complicated part of the story. And as we see with many of these serial killer investigations, there are stories that are within the stories. And also, somebody brought up the murder of Joseph Mumfree, the prime suspect in Los Angeles. That would be another case that's the story within the story.
Yeah, I'm going to buy it and read it. It looks like a great book.
And Zurab Sheila has something about the Burger Chef murders. Four people were taken from the shop, presumably killed 20 miles from the
Oh,
restaurant. Unusual. Most fast food crimes take place on the spot, still unsolved. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you that most crimes like that take place on the spot. And the Citizen Detective podcast also did one on the Austin yogurt shop murders. Same story, exactly like that. They were killed on the spot. When I said same story, I meant the second part of your comment. No, that really is bizarre. Now, Jerome, first impression. If somebody has taken four people, if four people have been transported 20 miles from the restaurant,
yeah.
that leads me to believe that they were specific targets. This person had a reason for transporting them.
Yeah.
Now, if they just wanted to murder them, they could do it on the spot. By transporting them, you might be
Yeah.
leaving more evidence behind. And I don't know, this seems like something that's very personal.
Yes. Yes. I see the same thing. Yeah.
But that's something we don't see with the Axeman crimes.
No.
Someone's breaking into the houses and attacking people at night when they are mostly defenseless. Those crimes are impersonal.
Yeah.
There could be what Jerome said. This is a mafia hitman, someone who has no connection to the victims. He's just doing this because he's instructed to.
Yeah.
If that's the case, we'll probably never know his identity. And this is one that I don't think is solvable, Jerome, unless there's some way, somehow, some breakthrough, something that we don't know about. Jack the Ripper might have a bigger chance of being solved than the New Orleans Axeman because of the amount of eyes
Yeah.
that have been put on Jack the Ripper. With the Axeman case, I don't even think things are that well documented.
No, like you say, I was expecting that police report or stuff like that could exist, but no, apparently no. So it's difficult to work on something when you don't have the police report and the the report of the autopsy. Or so we have Fire Pixie here.
Yes, Fire Pixie says, was the grocery market always cornered by Italians, or was it another ethnic group before the Italians came along? Like a retaliation thing? Ah, brilliant question, Fire Pixie. Now, I don't know who would have cornered the grocery market, again, prior to 1865 and so on, but whereas, the grocery market always cornered by Italians? Not completely, because, again, going off of memory, Louis Bessemer was a grocer, and he was not Italian. He was Polish. And Jerome, when we were talking about French pronunciations,
Yeah,
people often refer to him as Louis Bezume because that's how his name is spelled. But I mean, I call him Louis Bessemer. Miriam Davis called him Louis Bessemer because his heritage was not French; it was Polish. And he's a grocer and he's not Italian, so it's not a complete cornering of the market. And I know that's not a perfect answer to your question, Fire Pixie, but see, that's the type of thinking that I've explored in the past. Somebody who was put out of business because of the Italians. And Jerome, if you want to pull this next one up here from Haynes Anthony, it's a pretty good one. The mafia doesn't usually target women. Yes, I
it's true.
recall that as well, actually, just now, that this one of the strikes against this being a mafia crime because targeting men, women, and children.
Yeah,
Like, as we said, rest in peace to Mary Cordemelia. She was the young girl who was murdered. That also is a strike against them, and that just sounds like someone who has some type of personal issue with Italian grocers. A very bizarre MO. If this is not the mafia, very very bizarre. Because some people might go after women because they hate women. They might go after men because they hate men. Italian grocers, very specific.
do you think it could be an Italian himself?
Absolutely. If it's a mafia hitman, I would expect that he's
Yeah,
Italian. If it's just somebody who's been put out of business, then he could also be Italian. As Fire Pixie said, they seem to have a strong hold on grocery market. If it's someone who hated his father and his father was Italian, then he could have been Italian. Very
Yeah.
high possibility. The problem is, it's like we don't have like witness descriptions of him
No,
saying certain things in an accent. We don't have a composite sketch. We
no,
don't have like some type of clue that's been left behind, a book that he had been carrying, anything of the sort.
no. We don't know so much. And Anthony, you're right. The mafia you, does not usually target women or children, but there is exception, and it's not the same rules in all the mafia. Uh, Different mafia made some stuff different than other mafia. But about the Italian mafia, that's true that normally they don't target women or children, but there is exception. Sometimes there is exception. They was ready to kill Robert Kennedy. Jimmy Hoffa, yeah, Jimmy Hoffa was ready to kill Robert Kennedy and with all his family, and it's the mafia who tell him, "Hey, Jimmy, calm down, calm down. We don't kill kids or women." But he was not. Oh yeah, yeah, but and after that, his brother was killed, but it was not a mafia job. But so you see, it could happen. Jimmy Hoffa was part of the mafia, so and he was ready to shoot RFK and his wife and his children. So to placing a bomb in her house and made explode everything. So could happen. Could happen.
Fire Pixie has a good one here when she says, but gangs would. Now, Fire Pixie, I think you mean that gangs would target women and children in addition to men. And because we have lots of people coming over from Italy to New Orleans, is it possible that they're not very well connected and
Yeah.
maybe they're not connected to the larger mafia rings? And that
No.
this is more or less a gang. And yeah, if you mean something like that, then they're going to be playing by their own rules because they don't have to follow anybody else's rules or code of conduct. It could be all about the money at that point. Sure.
Oh yeah. Here we are not talking about the five big uh, mafia family of New York. We are talking about maybe a little group or little gang, mm, mafia related, but maybe not with the same rules. So, but that's something we don't know. It's something we don't know. And about the letter, because I was thinking about this letter, and the guy think he's invisible. He think he's and if for you on the scale to 0 to 10, uh, or where you put the where you put the writer was the killer.
Of the letter, I give it about a 3 out of 10. Now, the evidence for this is number one, he says he's the killer, he's admitting to it. And, he's talking about being invisible and he's not leaving a lot of evidence behind. The real killer didn't leave a lot of evidence behind. The reason why it only gets 3 points is it's just such a clearly articulate and educated person, even though maybe there are mistakes in the letter. It's also a very long letter. This definitely wasn't written by an illiterate person. This isn't just something that was scribbled on a wall or a sidewalk. This is a letter that's about a page and a half from someone who could clearly write and was clearly educated. And I just am not seeing any of this type of sophisticated behavior in the crimes. So I only give it a 3 out of 10. What about you?
Let's say 50-50, 5
5
or
out of 10?
10. Yeah,
Okay, okay,
yeah. For now, because
sure.
I don't have I don't have the knowledge you have. So yeah, Father
Now,
can.
Jerome, also out of curiosity, what do you think about the crimes that occurred in 1910 and 1911? Do you think that there was one serial killer that took a 7 month gap based on 7 year gap based on everything you heard, and then restarted in 1918, 1919? The Cleaver attacks, 1910, 1911, then the Axeman of 1918, 1919? One person or two people?
Two people.
Why is that?
I don't think it was the same person because yeah, there is this gap, this huge gap in the time, and I was wondering if after 98, 90, 80, 90,
1918?
90, 19, yeah, after 1919, if there were other crime of the same sort in New Orleans.
Now, it's my understanding that there were not, but there were
No,
axe attacks in other parts of Louisiana. There were also axe attacks in Texas. But the problem I have with this is that, again, these things happened all across the later part of the
yeah,
19th century and into the 20th century. And I even did a response to a documentary on Black Box Online Radio about how this one guy had created his own theory about how he thought that the first crime committed by the Axeman was the DeFore murders in 1879, which I mentioned,
hmm,
and that this was one killer who was a German national who moved to America when he was like around 21, 22 years old, and that he was committing murders from 1879 all the way to the 1920s in both the United States and Germany. And the reason why he's saying that is because of the frequency in these axe attacks and similar style attacks like the cleaver. Now, I don't think that there's one killer going from 1879 to 1922, but if anything, he showed that there are axe attacks that are happening very frequently. In the 20th century, we're also going to see something called the man from the train, which is a serial killer hypothesis that there was somebody who was committing murders in different parts of the country, like a traveling serial killer committing the crimes by axe, and then he is going to just commit the crimes and get on the train and go to another part of the country. And that's a very big theory in the Villisca Axe murders. But it's also not a very big one in the New Orleans Axeman case. I just don't think it's that elaborate, but yes, there are lots of similar style axe attacks all around America, and as we see, also Europe.
yeah, yeah. And it's maybe somebody who was um making his service during the World War II and come back to New Orleans and with post stress disorder or something like this. It's something could be possible too, but with the if, it's yeah. I don't know. It's strange. It's really really strange. This fire
Okay,
pixie
Fire
here.
Pixie says it seems odd to go from a convenient handheld cleaver to a heavier, more cumbersome axe. Well, now, Fire Pixie, as I stated with one of the attacks, I believe it's the attack on the Crudies in 1910, that somebody stole that from a butcher shop that was about 2 blocks away. Now, light, lighter, more agile, yes. Convenient, perhaps not. If they could just get the axe from this person's property, like from the backyard, back porch, that's right there, versus locating a butcher shop that's 2 blocks away. Number one, breaking into the butcher shop without being caught or noticed. And number two, making the journey 2 blocks, it would be more convenient to go for the axe, even though it's a less agile and less delicate weapon. It's a very, as you said, it's a cumbersome weapon. So I'm halfway in, halfway out on that. Hey, Voodoo Baby is here. Hola, Voodoo Baby.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Oh, Straight Jacket with Joan Crawford. Haynes Anthony, is that a movie? With Joan Crawford, it's probably a
Yeah,
movie.
yeah,
You guys are sending me so many movies, but I'm in the Philippines right now, so we don't have the biggest selections, and we also don't have the most streaming services. We do have Netflix, so I'm most likely going to have to set that up, get a Netflix account to watch. This is the Zodiac speaking. This month here in October, even though a lot of people are not excited about it. Ross, if you're still in the chat, Ross Geraci from Planet X Filmworks was not looking forward to that, as he stated on his live stream. And Mike Morford, whom I interviewed recently, also said he's skipping it completely. I'm going to try to watch it if I can get it here in the Philippines, but we have some restricted content.
yeah, yeah. But I see in Belgium, we will see it. So yeah, I'm not really excited about anything in this program because I don't think we will learn something interesting. It's the seawater story, but I don't know. It's entertainment.
Well, if anything, congrats to them for getting a documentary crew to look at their story and to share it. And I don't think they're frauds. I don't think they're just like liars. And so
No, no,
I
that
think that it's good they have the exposure, the publicity, and if they want people to examine their story and to hear them out,
yeah,
there you go.
that's exactly what I said to Connie Seawaters. I told her that I was feeling bad for her if something wrong happened to her and her brother in the past, and I was feeling bad, but I was I don't think Arthur Allen was the Zodiac, and she told me I don't think either. So
Who knows what we'll find in that
yeah,
documentary.
maybe she was telling that because there is this documentary on Netflix who's coming on, but I don't know. I really don't know.
Right now, and at this time, I would like to ask everybody in the chat, do you have any final questions about the New Orleans Axeman or other true crime cases? Please drop them down below. And as always, you know
Yeah,
that I'm
absolutely.
on Black Box Online Radio, and as you see down here, True Crime Talk Radio in the morning comes to you at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Tuesdays and Thursdays, for the Autumn of Terror, if you will, going till November 9th of 1888. Autumn of Terror is August 31st to November 9th. And feel free to check out some things. And as I said, if you do want to have any follow-ups from this program, I recommend my interview with Miriam C. Davis. And she's appeared in some other places. And she has written the definitive authority on the New Orleans Axemen. There are a couple books out there that have some chapters dedicated to it as well. And if you do want to listen to the old black box recordings on the Axeman of New Orleans, sure. Oh, but Jerome, I forgot. I wanted to begin the show actually this way, but I went and I found the person who recommended this, giving a shout out to you, Lola, from wherever you are. 3 years ago, Lola recommended that I do the series on the Axeman of New Orleans for October, for Halloween. How fitting that Jerome and I got together in October to talk about this. So, Lola, still with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Rhoda. Excellent idea.
Okay, Fire Pixie has something to say. I tried to watch the Netflix show about the Menendez brothers, but it was horrendous. Couldn't get through the first episode. Now, is there something that's going on with their case? Because 48 Hours just dropped an episode about the Menendez brothers yesterday. Now, depending on your time zone, might be today for you, but I just saw that, and I did my response to the documentary Suburban Nightmare, the Menendez brothers on Black Box Online Radio, and I haven't gone back to that particular story. And the Suburban Nightmare documentary was very hard on the Menendez brothers, but they were challenging a lot of their stories, saying they doubted their claims of abuse. And, Eric and Lyle Menendez are in jail for murdering their parents. And their defense was they were abused throughout their whole lives and they just reached a breaking point. But the Suburban Nightmare documentary was really trying to throw water on a lot of their claims. And I'm just sitting back watching this as some guy in the audience, like, I don't know. They're saying they're victims. I don't really want to just jump up and be like, you're liars. I don't really take that standpoint, Jerome, where you just want to blame the victim or call the victim out and just say that they're lying when they're sharing their own personal stories. And Fire Pixie says the Innocence Project. Is the Innocence Project doing something to try and get them released? That was the only thing that I could think of. I think I saw some headline on Facebook that there was some celebrity that was petitioning to have the Menendez brothers released from prison.
I think the Innocence Project have taken the case of Chris Watts. But yeah, Fire Pixie say yep.
All right, but Jerome, thank you so much for having me on your channel to talk about the Axeman of New Orleans and all things true crime. And everybody in the chat, you guys had loads of great things about all types of true crime cases. And it sounds like Jerome and I are going to have a lot to explore for some future episodes of Let's Talk with Ned, as well as just here on Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. Hey, Charlie, you're back. Good to see you as always.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ned. I have lost you. We have lost you for a moment when you was talking.
Oh, you lost me? I lost you for a second. Your screen was frozen. You didn't hear me?
No.
I just said thank you for having me on your channel.
Oh, and thank you again to accept my invitation. And on Monday we will do the episode 9 of the mystery of the Zodiac Killer mystery. It will be about Paul Stein because it was his anniversary, the anniversary of his death.
Sure.
And on Friday we will have Jerry Buting talking about his life um, and his book and all kind of stuff. Yeah, on next Saturday we will come back with Ned to talking about the Phantom Killer.
The Freeway Phantom, right?
Oh yeah, the Freeway Phantom. Yeah, the Freeway
Yes.
Phantom. Thank
Phantom
you.
from the DC area.
Yeah, and on Monday it will be the no, so not this Monday. Next Monday it will be the episode 10 of the mystery of the Zodiac Killer. So
I
times
don't know
fly.
how that happened, Jerome. It feels like we're on episode 3. It's really been 9 weeks already.
Yeah,
10 weeks.
yeah. Time flies. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But it was really a pleasure to have you, Ned, like always. And
Thank you, Jerome, and thank you for also giving me a chance to talk about the Axeman of New Orleans. Some people have brought some things up here in the chat about maybe recent developments with the Menendez brothers, Chris Watts, and especially Brian Koberger, because these are stories where we are chasing the news. We're still waiting for the news to come out. Whereas with the Axeman of New Orleans, this case is one of the coldest that I've ever explored. And I don't know if we're going to have too many breakthroughs in the Axeman case. And I think a lot of it is just not only lost to time, but also lost to secrecy. If we're dealing with a mafia hitman, that's going to be not well documented, if you understand me. And
I don't know for you, but I'm.
rats, I was just doing my closing.
Oh,
Anyway, I just said, hey Jerome, it's been a pleasure.
it was a pleasure too. So
All
see
right.
you.
Thank you
See
everybody
you
in
on
the chat.
Monday, and thank you
See you on
everybody in the
Monday.
chat.
I'm Ned on Black Box Ned from Black Box Online Radio. Until next time, guys.
Bye and subscribe to BBOR. It's a really excellent channel, but you know that I love this channel. And you can find also Ned on Spotify, on Facebook, on Instagram, And I hope to see you all on Monday for the episode 9 of the Zodiac Killer Mystery Special Paul Stein. See you soon.